I want to tell you something I've never said out loud, not to my friends, not to my family, not to anyone who knew me when I was winning, especially not to anyone who knew me when I was winning, because when you're winning, nobody asks you how you're doing. They ask you how you did it, and you get so good at answering that question that you forget it's not the same thing. You forget somewhere along the way that doing and being are two completely different countries, and you've been living in one while sending postcards from the other. I want to tell you about the night I sat on the floor of an apartment I'd worked 4 years to afford, in a city I'd chosen because it meant something to other people, and I felt absolutely nothing, not sadness, not pride, not exhaustion, nothing. Just this vast interior silence that had no echo in it, like standing in a room and realizing the walls don't exist, like reaching for something you've always known was there and finding only air. I built a morning routine that would make productivity gurus weep with joy. I built a body that turned heads and a schedule that left no room for anything that couldn't be optimized. I built a reputation. I built a bank account with a number in it that my younger self would have cried looking at. I built a version of myself that was functional, impressive, disciplined, and completely, catastrophically hollow. I thought that was strength. I thought the man who needed nothing from anyone was the strongest man in the room. I thought the man who had processed his pain alone, who had turned his wounds into work ethic, who had converted every sleepless night into another brick in the empire. I thought that man was the one worth becoming. Nobody told me that empire and home are not the same thing. Nobody told me you can build something magnificent and still be homeless inside it. Wait, before you scroll. Before you move on to something easier, something louder, something that doesn't ask anything from you, I need you to stay with me for a minute, because I'm not talking to everyone right now. I'm talking to you specifically, the one who's good at surviving, the one who turned their childhood into a qualification, the one who learned very early that the safest way to be loved was to be useful, to be impressive, to be low maintenance, to be, God, that word, fine. I'm talking to the person who has 17 tabs open right now, not because they need information, but because silence is too loud. Because when everything goes quiet, the question you've been running from gets up from wherever you buried it and walks into the middle of the room, and you don't know what to do with it, so you open another tab. Don't deny it. I grew up understanding love as something you earned. I don't say that to indict anyone. I say it because it's true, and because the truth of it shaped everything I became before I understood it was shaping me. In my house, love arrived in response to performance. When I succeeded, the temperature in the room went warm. When I failed, when I struggled, when I was loud about my confusion or afraid of something I couldn't explain, the temperature dropped. Not cruelly, not dramatically, just noticeably, just enough to teach me. And I was a very good student. I learned to keep the temperature warm. I learned to lead with my achievements and bury my questions. I learned to present the final product and never show the working. I learned that the version of me that needed things, that was uncertain, that was scared, that was sitting with something unresolved, that version was the version you kept private. You didn't bring that version to the table. That version didn't eat. So I fed the other one instead. I fed the capable one, the composed one, the one who had answers, who had plans, who was always 3 steps ahead of his own vulnerability. I fed him everything, every hour of every day. And he grew enormous. He grew into this impressive, immovable, exhausting thing that looked like a man but was actually a performance that had forgotten it was performing. And then she came, not like lightning, not like revelation, not like anything the stories prepare you for. She came like the first real winter morning after a long, strange summer, quietly, undeniably, with a chill in it that made you feel suddenly, strangely awake. She didn't come with rescue. She didn't arrive with a speech about potential or promises about transformation. She came with presence, with those eyes that didn't look at you, they looked into you, and somehow that was different. That specific, quiet attention that doesn't ask you to perform or explain or justify, that just simply, steadily receives you. She came with honesty that didn't feel like attack. She came with questions that weren't interrogations. She came with a kind of patience that I initially mistook for passivity until I realized that patience, real patience, isn't passive at all. It's one of the most active, courageous, demanding things a human being can offer another human being. Patience says, I'm not going anywhere. And I understood slowly that most people in my life had been going somewhere. I had been going somewhere. We were all going somewhere, always perpetually in motion, perpetually performing the act of motion, and she was just still. She was just there. Fully, stubbornly, wonderfully there. I thought I could love her the way I loved everything else, at full optimization, efficiently, with dedicated calendar blocks and relationship goals and love languages identified and processed and deployed. I thought I could bring my whole empire-building energy into this and produce the most impressive relationship anyone had ever seen. I thought love was another project I could dominate. Here's what I learned. Love is not a project. Love is not a performance review. Love does not respond to optimization. Love looks at your efficiency strategies and your love language spreadsheet and your vulnerability scheduled for Thursday at 7 p.m. and it says, put all of that down right now and just be here. Be here badly if you have to. Be here imperfectly. Be here with the messy, unprocessed, unfinished version of yourself that you've been keeping in the basement. Bring him up. He's been down there too long. He's pale. He needs sunlight. I didn't know how. I want to be honest about that because I think there's something important in it. I didn't know how to be present. I could be productive. I could be useful. I could solve problems and plan trips and remember anniversaries and compliment intelligently and do all the things that look like love from the outside. But presence, the particular kind of presence where you put down the doing and let yourself be witnessed in the being, that was a skill I had surgically removed from myself at an early age and stored somewhere I couldn't easily locate. Look at me for a second. How long has it been since someone sat across from you and you let them actually see you? Not the version of you that's got it together, not the version that's working on themselves and making progress and trending upward on every meaningful metric. The other one, the one that's tired, the one that's confused about what they actually want as distinct from what they've been told to want. The one that sometimes cries in the car, not because anything specific happened, but because the cumulative weight of everything specific is always there, always present, always being carried so quietly that you forgot other people can't see it.
How long since you let someone see that? I'll tell you when I last let someone see it. I'll tell you exactly.
She came home once. We weren't living together yet. She was just at my place, just sitting in the kitchen while I finished something on my laptop, just being that particular kind of quietly present that she was. And she said, not loudly, not dramatically, just conversationally, "You're exhausted and you're not telling me." It wasn't a question. It wasn't an accusation. It was just a fact delivered with such precision that I had nowhere to hide it. I had nowhere to send it. It just sat there in the kitchen between us, true, undeniable. And I opened my mouth to say I was fine, and what came out instead was this enormous, unexpected, terrifying silence that lasted long enough to be honest. And then I said, "Yeah, just that, just yeah." One syllable, the smallest possible admission. And she nodded and said nothing else, and we sat there together in the kitchen, and I felt something shift in the structure of something very deep, like a building settling, like something that had been held too tight releasing, millimeter by millimeter, into something more like its actual shape. I built an altar to productivity, and I burned everything on it that wasn't immediately useful. I burned softness, I burned uncertainty, I burned the long, meandering conversations that don't go anywhere but sometimes arrive somewhere important by accident. I burned stillness, I burned boredom, not understanding that boredom is often just the antechamber to something genuine. I burned the parts of me that needed tending, and I called the smoke focus. I thought I was building an empire. I was building a prison with excellent lighting. Here's what I learned about prisons. They're most effective when the prisoner helps design them. When the prisoner becomes convinced that the walls are actually load-bearing. When the prisoner develops such sophisticated language for why the confinement is actually discipline that they stop being able to distinguish between the two. That's the architecture I had mastered. That was my masterwork, a confinement I called conviction. And she sat outside the prison with no particular urgency and no rescue fantasy and said, simply, repeatedly, by her presence more than her words, the door opens from the inside. I'm not going to open it for you. But I'm not going to leave while you're deciding either. Tell me something. When did you last do something that had no measurable outcome? When did you last spend an afternoon in a way that couldn't be optimized, couldn't be leveraged, couldn't be turned into content or capital or evidence of growth? When did you last just wander? When did you last let a conversation go nowhere and find it enough? When did you last ask for help without immediately moving to demonstrate that you'd be fine without it? These aren't rhetorical questions. These are the actual questions. These are the ones I should have been asking myself for a decade, the ones I was so good at not asking that I developed an entire personality around their avoidance. And here's the thing about questions you've been avoiding. They wait. They have extraordinary patience. They find you eventually. They find you on bathroom floors and in the middle of perfectly successful evenings and on the floors of expensive apartments in cities you chose for their implications. They find you and they ask themselves with a kind of quiet persistence that is almost respectful in its certainty. I remember the first time she got angry with me. Not frustrated, not disappointed. Genuinely, cleanly, righteously angry. I had been absent again. Not physically. I was right there in the room doing all the physical things that presence requires. But the essential me, the me that she was talking to when she talked to me, was somewhere else, was running calculations, was managing some private emergency that I had decided not to share because sharing it would mean admitting it existed. And admitting it existed would mean being vulnerable. And being vulnerable in front of someone who might, at some future date, stop loving me was a risk that my entire interior architecture had been designed to prevent. She said, "I don't need you to be perfect. I need you to be here. Those are different things. And I can't keep choosing the second when you keep offering me the first." I had nothing. I had no optimization for that moment. No strategy, no deflection that felt adequate to the weight of what she'd just said. I just had to stand there and hold it and let it be what it was, which was true, which was fair, which was devastating in the specific way that truth is devastating when you've been avoiding it for a very long time. Here's what I learned about collapse. I spent years understanding collapse as failure, as the thing to be prevented, as the enemy of progress. I organized my entire existence around the avoidance of collapse. Every system, every habit, every defensive behavioral pattern I'd constructed. They were all, in their own way, fortifications against the moment when everything would fall apart. I thought if I could just keep building, keep reinforcing, keep optimizing, the collapse would never come. But here's what I learned. Collapse is sometimes mercy. Collapse is sometimes the mercy you can't give yourself. When you have built something that is holding you captive and you are too invested in it to dismantle it willingly, sometimes the only thing left is for it to fall. And the falling isn't the end of the story. The falling is the story. The falling is where it gets real. The falling is where you get to find out who you actually are beneath everything you've constructed to convince the world and yourself that you're someone sufficient. The empty room I described at the beginning, that night, that floor, that vast interior silence, that was mercy. I understand it now. It was the whole edifice collapsing. Everything I had built to substitute for presence, for authenticity, for actual intimate human connection, it all came down at once, quietly, without drama, on a Tuesday evening in an expensive apartment. And what was left was just me. Just the original, unoptimized, undefended, sufficient, terrified, real me sitting on the floor. And it was okay. I want to say that slowly because I need you to hear it. It was okay. She and I sat down one Sunday morning. This is much later after I'd begun the long, unglamorous, non-cinematic work of learning to be actually present. And we made coffee and we didn't talk about goals or growth or the future or what we were building. We talked about nothing. We talked about the light in the room. We talked about whether the tree outside was diseased or just that particular shade of yellow. We talked about nothing for so long and with such genuine, unhurried investment that I felt at the end of it the way I imagine people feel at the end of a very long and very real prayer. I thought, this is what I was trying to build toward. And I was building in the wrong direction the whole time. The foundation wasn't the achievement. The foundation was the Sunday morning. The foundation was the light in the room and the coffee going cold and the conversation that went nowhere and meant everything. I had been building from the top down. I had been trying to construct the roof before I'd laid the foundation. And I kept wondering why everything was unstable. Why everything felt like it was always one thing away from falling. Why every achievement only created the anxiety of its own potential loss. Because I had the order wrong. Because I had fundamentally confused what mattered. Look at me for a second. You're not failing because you're not doing enough. I want to say that again because I know how the voice in your head works. I know how fluent it is in the language of inadequacy. You are not failing because you're not doing enough. You might be succeeding so hard at the wrong things that you can't feel the failure until it's an entire apartment floor and an empty Tuesday evening. The most dangerous version of losing is when it looks like winning from the outside, when the metrics are all moving in the right direction and the people around you are impressed and the narrative of your life, as you describe it to someone new at a party, sounds like the beginning of an inspiring story, and yet you are privately, profoundly, inexplicably lost. That's the most dangerous version because it removes the feedback mechanisms. You can't course correct if nothing in your external environment signals that a correction is needed. That's why she mattered. That's why what she offered was the rarest, most precious thing anyone had offered me. She was a feedback mechanism. She was the mirror that didn't reflect the performance. She reflected the man behind it. And the man behind it needed work. Not the kind of work that produces results, the kind of work that produces presence. I started small. I want to be honest about this too, because the transformation stories that get told are always cinematic, and that cinematography often does damage. Makes the change look sudden and whole, and real change is neither sudden nor whole. Real change is micro and incremental and embarrassingly unglamorous and frequently indistinguishable from staying exactly the same until you look back from sufficient distance and realize you are somehow, somewhere fundamentally different from where you started. I started by putting the phone down during dinner, not because I had suddenly understood the philosophy of presence, because she asked me to and I respected her enough to try it, and it was harder than I expected, and that difficulty itself told me something important. The withdrawal was almost physical. The urge to check, to respond, to stay connected to the metrics and the movement and the evidence of productivity. It was constant, it was loud, it was embarrassingly urgent for something that was ostensibly optional, but I kept it down. And dinner happened. Real dinner. Dinner where things were said that would have gone unsaid. Dinner where she told me something about her day that became, in the telling, something more significant than either of us expected. Dinner where I laughed, genuinely unperformatively laughed, at something small and forgettable and completely irreplaceable. I started going for walks without listening to anything. This sounds insignificant. It wasn't. It was a practice in tolerating my own mind in its natural, unstructured state, which I had been avoiding for so long that the first weeks of it felt genuinely uncomfortable. Just my thoughts, just the street, just the afternoon. Not optimizing, not processing, not converting the walk into a meditation session I could report on or a thinking session I could extract insights from. Just walking. Just being the person walking. I started telling her when I was scared, not immediately, not easily, not without the tight, constricted feeling in the chest that says this is dangerous, this makes you less, this is vulnerability, and vulnerability is the open wound you protect. But I started. And the first time I said, I'm scared about this, and nothing terrible happened, the world didn't end, she didn't leave, the relationship didn't collapse under the weight of my admission, I understood something that no amount of theory had been able to give me, that safety was real, that it had been there the whole time, that I had been protecting myself from something that wasn't there. Wait. Before you scroll, I'm almost done. Stay with me. I want to talk about the bricks. I spent years collecting them. Every achievement, every skill acquired, every milestone reached, every standard exceeded. Bricks. I was going to build something with them. Something magnificent and permanent and worthy of the effort. I laid them carefully, methodically, one on top of the other, and I stood back periodically and looked at what I was building and felt something that wasn't quite satisfaction, but was at least the temporary silencing of the voice that said, not enough yet. The bricks were real. The work was real. None of that was wasted. I want to be clear about that. None of the discipline, none of the drive, none of the long hours and early mornings was wasted. But the building I was making with them, the empire, the monument, the towering, impressive, isolated structure I was constructing, that building had no one in it. That building was for an audience that was never actually watching. That building was for the approval of people who had moved on, or never cared in the first place, or cared only insofar as my success reflected well on them. And what she offered me was the understanding that the same bricks could build something else, that the same discipline and drive and willingness to invest could be redirected. Not abandoned, redirected, not deconstructed, repurposed. That the capacity I had for excellence could be brought to bear on the things that actually endured, on presence, on honesty, on the slow, patient, unglamorous work of actually knowing and being known by another human being. That you could take everything you had built and everything you were capable of building and use it not to construct an empire, but to create a home, a real one. The kind where the foundation is genuine and the walls don't depend on maintaining a performance and the rooms have actual warmth in them. The particular, irreplaceable warmth of being truly known and choosing to stay anyway. Here's what I learned about love. Not romance. Not the early, electric, terrifying aliveness of the beginning, though that was real and I'm grateful for it. Love. The long, settled, decided, daily kind. The kind that has seen you at your worst and remains. The kind that has heard you say things you're not proud of and hasn't rewritten the story of you. The kind that sits with your fear without trying to fix it, that holds your sadness without trying to solve it, that meets your anger with curiosity rather than combat. That kind is the most courageous thing I have ever witnessed. It requires more strength than any discipline I imposed on myself, more courage than any risk I took in pursuit of achievement, more consistency than any habit I built in service of optimization. It requires the willingness to show up daily for someone in their full complexity, not the curated complexity, not the complexity you've been given permission to witness, but the full, unedited, sometimes bewildering, sometimes exhausting, always ultimately, always irreducibly, always sufficiently human complexity. And it requires the willingness to be witnessed in the same way, to let someone in past the performance, past the competence, past the finished product, and into the working, the drafts, the revisions, the rough cuts of yourself that you haven't yet decided are presentable, to let someone love you in your process rather than only in your conclusions. That is what she offered me. That is what I almost refused because I had confused exposure with weakness and had been confusing them for so long that the error felt like wisdom. Don't deny it. You know the feeling I'm describing. Not all of it maybe, some of it in different forms, in different rooms, under different circumstances, but the essential feeling, the feeling of being impressive and unseen simultaneously, the feeling of performing so fluently that even the people who love you are watching the performance rather than witnessing the person. The feeling of arriving at a place you worked very hard to reach and finding it strangely, insistently insufficient. You know that feeling. And I'm telling you, from the other side of the floor moment, from the other side of the collapse and the rebuilding, I'm telling you that the insufficiency you feel is not evidence of your inadequacy. It's evidence that you've been building toward the wrong thing. It's the compass working. It's your deepest intelligence refusing to be satisfied with a version of your life that has everything except the things that matter. The emptiness is an invitation. I know it doesn't feel like one. I know it feels like failure, like falling, like the beginning of something terrible. But emptiness creates space, and space is where the real building happens. The kind of building that doesn't hollow you out as it rises, The kind that asks more of you than discipline, that asks presence, honesty, the terrifying, courageous willingness to be known she's not perfect. I need you to understand that. This isn't a story about a woman who arrived and fixed a man. That story is a fantasy, and fantasies, however comforting, are ultimately just very convincing avoidances of real work. She is a person, complicated, contradictory, brilliant, in ways that surprise me still, difficult in ways that have required me to grow, afraid of things she's brave enough to name, uncertain in ways she's strong enough to sit with. A person, and I am a person, still in the middle of becoming. Still some days reaching for the old armor, still some days feeling the pull of the performance, still capable of choosing productivity over presence and calling it discipline, still learning, slowly, imperfectly, genuinely, what it means to be actually here. But we are building something, with full knowledge of each other's foundations, with honesty about what the structure requires and what it can bear, with the willingness to do the work not on the building but on the builders, on ourselves, on each other, on the space between us that has to be tended daily or it becomes distance. We are building a home, not an empire. A home, my future wife, if you're out there, and I believe you are, I have to believe you are, not as superstition but as faith in the logic of desire and the idea that the specific longing for a specific kind of love doesn't arrive in you without reason. If you're out there, I want you to know this. I know what I was. I know the man I showed up as for most of my life, capable, composed, impressive, absent. I know that version had things to recommend it and things that would have made being loved by it exhausting. I know the work I've done, and I know the work that remains. I am not presenting you with a finished product. I am presenting you with someone who has stopped mistaking the finished product for the point. I want to know you. Not the version of you that you've prepared for public consumption, not the achievements and the competencies and the curated story. I want to know what you think about when there's nothing to think about, what you're afraid of that you haven't found language for yet, what you want from life that seems too specific or too simple or too embarrassing to say out loud. I want the long conversation that goes nowhere. I want the Sunday morning and the coffee going cold. I want the fight that teaches us something. I want the ordinary Tuesday that we'll never remember and that will somehow in aggregate be everything. I want to build with you, not for an audience, not as a monument, as a home, a real one with all the warmth and difficulty and dailiness that real homes require. Look at me for a second. And to you, the person watching this who isn't waiting for someone, the person who is in the middle of something, who is on their own floor, in their own empty room, in the particular dark of their own Tuesday evening. I want to say this to you directly, as plainly and honestly as I can. You are not the performance. You are not the achievement. You are not the empire you've been building or the reputation you've been cultivating or the competencies you've been accumulating as evidence against the original sentence that was handed down against you before you were old enough to contest it. You are not the armor. You are what's underneath it. And what's underneath it is sufficient. I know you don't believe that. I know the voice that argues against it is fluent and convincing and has been making its case for a very long time, and I'm not going to tell you it's easy to stop listening to it. It's not easy. It's the daily practice of your life, and it is harder than any productivity discipline I've ever undertaken. But here's what I know. The people who are capable of the deepest love are usually the people who are most thoroughly convinced that they didn't deserve it. The sensitivity that was trained into vulnerability was originally a form of perception, a form of depth, a form of the particular kind of attunement to other human beings that, properly directed, properly supported, properly met, becomes the foundation of something real and enduring and transformative. Your wound is not your weakness. Your wound is the door, and the door opens from the inside, and someone is on the other side of it, and they're not going anywhere. The foundation is laid differently now, not in achievement, not in the kind of impressive vertical rise that commands external attention, quietly, horizontally, in the daily choices that no one is watching and that have no metric attached to them, in the phone put down during dinner, in the walk without the podcast, in the conversation that goes nowhere and means everything, in the admission that something is hard, in the asking for help before you technically need it, in the presence offered to someone who didn't ask for it but needed it, in the willingness to be seen in the working rather than only in the finished, in the Sunday morning, in the coffee, in the light. That's the foundation. That's what everything else gets built on. And when you lay it that way, when you build the foundation before you raise the walls, what you build doesn't collapse. It settles. It deepens. It becomes slowly, unhurriedly, without fanfare, exactly what it was always meant to be. A home, my future wife. Are you listening to me right now? I built a lot of things before I understood what I was building toward. And I'm still building. I'll always be building. That part of me isn't going anywhere. But I know now what the building is for. I know what it's supposed to house. I know what warmth it's supposed to hold. And I'm ready. Not finished. Not perfected. Not arrived. Not the completed version of the man who deserves you. Just ready. ready to build towards something real, to be known and not run, to show up badly on the days I can't show up well, to ask for help, to sit with difficulty, to be a foundation worth building on. I'm ready for the Sunday mornings. I'm ready for the long, meandering conversation. I'm ready for the ordinary Tuesday, the coffee going cold, the light in the room. I'm ready for you and you. You watching this right now, you listening in the dark or the car or the kitchen, you somewhere between the person you've been and the person you're becoming. You're ready to, you just haven't believed it yet. Believe it.